Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast. This Week in America. Sapphire, A Life That Almost Wasn't by Lorrie Blitch is the story of a day-old kitten found in a dumpster on a cold January night in Florida. Sapphire was rescued by the school janitor, raised by the school nurse and the school administrator. Sapphire grows to be a happy, content cat. The book is so much more than just a cat story. It teaches us the value of life, that all life has significance and a purpose. The author, Lorrie Blitch, has an impressive and diverse career in nursing and as a business owner. She's the owner of Magellan Christian Academies for the past 20 years in Phoenix and Jacksonville. Her schools have won numerous awards, including Declaration of Magellan Day by the Mayor of Jacksonville in 2010. Her school was listed as one of the top 3 early learning centers of Mesa, Arizona, that in 2020. She was featured as a top women in business in Jacksonville by Jacksonville Magazine, recognized by Arbus Magazine as a female entrepreneur, a published author of children's books, achieving Book of the Month on Amazon, and an amazing experience in nursing. Very impressive, encompassing critical care, trauma, cardiovascular intensive care, toxicology, administration and management, nursing profession, medical legal nursing, and field hospital nursing. A nurse educator in Phoenix responsible for the education of multiple service lines, and she served her country admirably as a Navy officer for 20 years, lectures nationally and internationally on nursing topics, a nursing degree, a bachelor's degree rather in nursing, master's degree in nursing education, sits on the board of directors for Banyan School, New Delhi, India. She lectures on the dangers of academia's indoctrination establishments and the importance of returning to traditional academic learning. It's a pleasure to welcome back to This Week in America, Lorrie Blitch, author of Sapphire, A Life That Almost Wasn't. Lorrie, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you back with us.
Well, thanks for having me back, Rick. It's a pleasure to be back on your show, and you're 3 hours ahead on the East Coast.
A little ahead of you here, and so the sunshine is here. It's late afternoon. It's time now in Florida. We can go for a walk in a short while, so we'll get that one in outside of the heat of the day. An impressive background, and I wanted to do that because you have such an impressive background in medical, as well as education, an entrepreneur. Let's talk about the role you have in education. This is fascinating, all that you've done with emphasis on private education. What made you get into that field of private education?
Well, I saw that in public schools there was indoctrination happening in this country, and we were bypassing children at a very young age, which is very, very important for them to learn at that particular time, open those pathways, for instance, science pathways and math pathways. So I saw that was being left behind, and a lot of these children nowadays are kind of follow the pack. And if you have students that are way above the pack, they tend to be pulled down to the pack. And so I wanted to start Magellan because I wanted to capture that learning curve, which is very great at that early stage of their life. I wanted faith-based Judeo-Christian principles. I wanted to teach math and science. I wanted to tightly control the education because I didn't want teachers to go in and just grab whatever resources they want, disregard a curriculum, but I wanted to tightly control it as to what they're taught in my schools. And of course, with schools a lot of times nowadays, there's a lot of social engineering going on, and that's not academia. That's just indoctrination, but we can talk about that. But I wanted to teach values, and focus on traditional academic learning, for instance, the phonics, and not memorization type learning, which memorization is anybody in academia who's been teaching knows that memorization is a lower form of learning. It's not your higher level of learning, for instance, application type questions. So I wanted to open Magellan so that we could start with these children at a very young age. I did not want to indoctrinate them because, like I said, indoctrination is a very poor form of education, if you really want to call it education at all. So our scores are we have great scores in our schools. In Florida, I know they go up on the internet, and all the early learning academies and schools, they go up on the internet. Parents can choose where they want to put their students based upon the test scores. So that certainly is a motivator as a school to make sure that students are adequately taught. So those are the main reasons why I wanted to open up. I have a school out here in Phoenix and looking to open up another school here before too long. But those are the main reasons of why I wanted to open up my early learning school here in Phoenix and also Jacksonville, Florida.
And the schools are Magellan Christian Academies, and as Lorrie mentioned, Phoenix and Jacksonville. Our guest is Lorrie Blitch. That's Lorrie Blitch. The book that we talked about the last time Lorrie was with us on the program, Sapphire, A Life That Almost Wasn't, is available at Amazon, the usual places. We'll give you that information as we go through the program, sort of focusing on Lorrie's educational aspect of her career. I think you might have touched upon it, but it's always interesting to sort of sort out the difference between private education and public education. Talk about that again, if you will. Sort of put that in perspective for parents.
Well, there is a difference. Typically with public schools, and a lot of parents don't realize this, is that in public school, it takes a lot more money to educate a child because there's so much administration in public schools that private schools do not have. Private schools run more efficiently because they have to, but public schools, there's a lot of social engineering that goes on in public schools, a lot of indoctrination. And also in public schools, they have a lot of factions. And in other words, you have these parents that want this, you have these parents that want that. And then this group of people want this. They want that. No, you can't teach this. No, you can teach that. So literally the public schools are thrashed from one side to the other, trying to educate, also to try to please so many different people and so many different groups that it almost morphs into something completely dysfunctional, and education just gets lost in the mix. So these kids walk out, and if they do graduate, and they might go into a college, and then colleges have to start remediating them. But with public schools students have to take tests in order to get admitted into the school, and they have to achieve a certain test score to be able to go into a private school. And the students are more motivated. You have parents that are more involved into their education. You also have uniforms, which help out a lot as far as preventing students from wearing inappropriate clothing.
Yes.
Class sizes are smaller. Graduation rates are much, much higher, and most of them it's 198 to 100% graduation. When they do leave the private schools and go into public schools, they are more prepared. Their standardized test scores are much higher than they are in public schools. And private schools don't stop teaching so that they can teach to the test. You learn what you've learned, and then we see where you are in the test scores. And that's what I do in my schools. We test in the fall, and then we test in the spring, and then I get a measure as to how well we have done as a school. And that's what good schools do. You don't teach to the test. You teach what you're to teach in the curricula and the objectives for that year, and then you test the students to make sure they have met those objectives. So
it seems like when you hear parents talk sometimes in public schools, the focus by the teacher, out of necessity in some cases, is on the test, and as soon as that's over, the focus is on the next test.
Correct. And I hear that a lot from a lot of public school teachers who do come and teach in my school. And a lot of them are very frustrated because they said, we're teaching to only the test. and that's not a good measure. And of course, then they have some behavioral issues going on, and a lot of students nowadays are just passed because the teachers are too scared to stand before the parents and say, your child is not passing my test. And then the teacher is drug into administration. You're not teaching my child well. And it's just a cycle that these teachers have to go through. And I feel badly for them, but it's a system that is from the top down has to be completely revamped. And I'm not sure really of the best way to do that because it starts from Washington, D.C. And of course, I'm a strong proponent of education needs to be more at the local level rather out of a federal level. And you just try to disseminate all this out. It's just not possible. It's just too big. And then you also have all of the people in Washington, D.C. that are wanting to push their agenda on the schools. And then it becomes completely dysfunctional.
And we've seen that over the years to the point, like you say, I'm not sure how you go back and make the necessary corrections. You've mentioned several times indoctrination. Talk about indoctrination versus true academia. I mean, how does that shape up?
Well, we're seeing too much. One of the other reasons why, and you asked me the question earlier, why I got into private schools, because I was on, you see indoctrination at the college level, university level. It's just wrought with indoctrination. Now it's in the high school level. Now we see it in the middle school. And it's really an abomination that it's even has spilled over into the elementary school. But I also see it in the early learning schools now that we are indoctrinating students. And I remember reading a quote a number of years ago by Adolf Hitler where he said that what good fortune for governments that the people do not think. And indoctrination is really, it's not education. It closes the mind. And in academia, you have to have standards. You can't just not have standards. True academia opens the mind where we think, and it raises educational standards. And, one case in point, what happened here recently when the CEO of YouTube took down those YouTube videos of Dr. Dan Erickson was his name, out of Bakersfield, California, because it didn't fit her narrative. Well, how does she know that what he was not saying was accurate or inaccurate? She doesn't. And I can tell her right now her YouTube video is full of inaccuracies, but because it didn't fit her narrative, then she took it down. That's indoctrinating people on her end, and that is very, very damaging to a country. But the big primary difference between education and indoctrination is that education is objective, and indoctrination will elevate one system of thought over another. And for instance, when I was in when I first entered naval service as a naval officer, I went to officer indoctrination school in Newport, Rhode Island. And in there, it was indoctrination because they were indoctrinating me into the military way of life. They wanted to strip all my civilianness out of me so that they could indoctrinate me into the military way of life, which has a good function. And that's what it's intended to be. But to do this at a school level, and where people don't think, they only think that there's only one way, much like the CEO at YouTube did. She doesn't want people to think. She only wants people to think her way, and that's wrong. But objective truth, and I always tell my students this, objective truth is when conditions are met without bias and conformed by science, and it's generally universally accepted. But education always points out that there's many different solutions to the same problem, but indoctrination says, no, there's only one solution to a problem. And that's very damaging to a country. And I remember watching a movie a number of years ago. It was called Idiocracy, and it was with Luke Wilson. It's a rather crude movie, but it kind of gives a sense to the viewer of what happens to people when they're indoctrinated. And just kind of a little synopsis of the movie, Luke Wilson and another girl was putting these hibernation pods for a year for some Army experiment. Well, it went awry and the base was closed down and they were forgotten about for 500 years. So they come back in like the year 2505 or something of that type. And to a world that's completely changed, the world had trash waste that had a big avalanche. Roads were unfinished. People were driving off bridges. Buildings were held together by these big, massive rubber bands. People were educated at Costco, and they were completely indoctrinated. The society had disintegrated into a declassing and complete dumbing down of society. And so I believe, even if I remember right, even in the movie, there was Luke Wilson was in trouble. He was a mediocre guy in 2005, but in 2500, he was the smartest guy on the planet. So
it became a genius in comparison to everybody else there. Lorrie Blitch, our guest on the program, she's the owner of Magellan Christian Academies for the past 20 years, schools in Phoenix as well as Jacksonville, with plans to expand that, award-winning schools. Time is going by so quickly. I want to talk for a second about colleges and degrees. The question remains today, is college worth it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of data out there that shows that it isn't worth it anymore. People are spending a king's ransom of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000.
It's frightening, yes.
To go to, it is. And they're also going to college at the high school level, and I don't believe they should be going to college at the high school level. That needs to be reserved for when you are done with high school, then you go in and get your degree. But there are so many degrees anymore. Years and years ago, you went to college to get a degree, and pharmacy, to become an accountant, to become a CPA, for dentistry, veterinary medicine, nursing, to become a physician. But nowadays, you get a degree in literally everything, and it's cheapened the degrees. People, I think, are a little upset when they get out. I had one girl that came to my school that wanted a degree. She had a degree in art history, and she wanted to make all this money, and she was a flight attendant at that point because she couldn't get a job anywhere else. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't really use your degree here, and I'm sorry I can't pay you that kind of money. That's just good business sense. And I said, so, maybe you ought to look at something else that you need to do. So, she was a very nice girl, and I don't think she realized what she was getting herself into. But I see all these degrees in sociology, psychology, art history. It's just biology. Unless you're going to go to med school or dental school or do something like that, then why get a biology degree? So, and these colleges have done a grave disservice. What we've created now is an educational bubble, and similar to the housing bubble. And I think it's over $1 trillion of student debt. And now we have politicians running around out there like Joe Biden and people like that are saying, hey, we'll forgive your, or Nancy Pelosi, I don't know which one. So, hey, we'll forgive your student debt. It's like, are you, what is wrong with you? You can't do that.
It's a strange world we're living in out there now, and time is going by quickly. But I got a couple more thoughts. I want to first of all find out. Well, save this, Magellan, where you're going with the schools, because you've got this concept that has been so successful over the last several decades. What you will do with Magellan, but I want to sort of wrap this up, the general conversation, talking about coronavirus and how people behave during this pandemic and how it relates to the way people are educated. Is there any correlation there?
Well, that's the problem with indoctrination. It tends to make people think one way. And with this pandemic, what's surprising to me that the low emotional intelligence of people that was exhibited, the people running to the stores buying toilet tissue, having the news media on 24/7, and the news media, I just anymore call them Stepford anchor men, Stepford anchor women, because they all have the same narrative. They all look alike anymore. Same color of hair, same color of lipstick, and they all have the same narrative. And after about the seventh day, I turned it off. I didn't watch him anymore. The only one I watched was Tucker Carlson because he brought up some critical questions. And I just saw unbelievable behaviors out there that people exhibited. And this wasn't anything near that people were saying it was. It's just really nothing worse than the flu. And then everybody would argue with me and say, yes, but the flu is, you're contagious with this coronavirus before you have symptoms. I said, yes, and you are so with the flu. Yes, but it's more contagious, but so is the flu. So is the cold. So is measles. So is chickenpox. So the point is you haven't done your research. You've listened to these news medias, which you need to shut them off. You need to shut them off, shut off your social media, because it's nothing but it's sensationalism. And I said, but if you study the data and you really drill down to the data, then you would think, wait a moment, this isn't what they're making this thing out to be. I mean, I think one of the things was like 2-some million Americans were going to die. And it's like, no, I don't think so. And of course, the statistics are all over the map anymore. They're not even accurate anymore. I mean, because they call everything a corona death. I mean, you could
that's the
within
problem.
a week of,
Yeah, trying to figure this all out, and they're throwing out numbers, and then you find out their qualifications with all these numbers, they'll asterisk when you're looking at all of this, and it makes it very difficult to try to sort out the information. I think you've got to turn to the movie channel and watch something that's going to take your mind off of being bombarded with all these messages throughout the day. I think you'll enjoy life more.
I think so too. And, you know, I think that a couple of things came to light over the last probably 4 weeks when Dr. Dan Erickson and his colleague up in Bakersfield brought up some critical questions. And then we saw this woman in Texas who refused to apologize to a court, which I've never heard of someone apologizing to a court,
yes.
Which this judge was clearly out of control. But, you know, I just saw such low emotional intelligence, and this happens because people are not properly educated, or else if they have been educated at a college level, they were in one of these pseudo disciplines, which are usually involved in political activism, and these pseudo disciplines just don't have any standards. So basically, you could stand on a street corner and say, "Hey, the United States is the worst country on the earth," and get an A in the course. So what I saw here during this time with this coronavirus is nobody's looking at the data as to really what's going on. I mean, you even see politicians, a couple of them, saying, hey, we should close for 12 or 18 months. It's like, whoa, think what you even said, what this would do to our economy.
Yes. It's frightening, some of the things that are said. And I've got about a minute or so left here, and not nearly enough time, but talk about Magellan in your plans. You've done such an excellent job with Magellan Christian Academies over the last 20 years in Phoenix and in Jacksonville. What are the long-range plans for Magellan?
Well, I'm currently working on another school here in Phoenix. I want to get about 4 schools out here going, and I've kind of slowed up a little bit right now because of the economy, and we're just now starting to come back out here in Phoenix. So I kind of want to just hold off a little bit. I'm taking it a little bit slower. I was hoping to have it open by about fall time frame, but I'm afraid that it probably won't be till about the end of the year until these landlords kind of find their way, because a lot of tenants weren't able to pay their rent. So they're kind of reeling from this too.
Yes.
So I've kind of slowed it up, but I do want to open another one up here, or at least 3 more out here in Phoenix.
What is the website for Magellan? If people want to get more information on Magellan Christian Academies, what's the website to go to?
It's MagellanAcademies.com.
Simple enough, and we'll have that up on our website as well. And Sapphire, we mentioned in the beginning of the book, and you were here last time we talked about it. I understand there's a sequel you're working on, and the possibility of a screenplay as well. Exciting things happening with the Sapphire story.
Yes, it is. I'm currently working with somebody right now for my screenplay on the book, and she's very excited about it. She has a lot of experience in this, and so she and I are moving along that path to get this into a cartoon for children, and she's very excited about it. And And so am I, and I'm embarking upon a new adventure here that I've never done before. But it's exciting at the same time, and I'm learning a lot of things.
Well, that's fantastic. It's such a great story, Sapphire. The book's still available. You'll find it at Amazon. Hopefully we'll have Lorrie back sooner. We can talk about the sequel, the screenplay that's taking place right now, and Magellan Christian Academies, the schools she owns in Phoenix and in Jacksonville. Lorrie, it is always a pleasure catching up with you. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. Looking forward to having you back. So much more we can talk about. Thank you for sharing some time with us today.
Well, thank you, Rick, for having me back on your show.
It is our pleasure. Lorrie Blitch, our guest on the program. You'll find all the information, contact information, by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Back on today's program after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, Associate Producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, Segment Producer. Ben Watson, Webmaster. Otto Bechet, Director of Engineering and TV Production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, Executive Producer of This Week in America.